Now, Normana, this series has given me a wonderful opportunity to speak with you about your career, which spans some 50 years. But I'd like, first of all, to start in 1993 with something that Ian Howard said, that it's courageous of a senior artist to turn her established working process upside down and leap into the unknown. But I think this is something that you've always done.
I was told it was a failing at first, and then but I have this temptation to try exciting new media, particularly.
Yes.
And in the last 30 or so years, or even 40 years actually, things like photography in art, photography in printmaking. Before that it was the photocopy. And
Ian Howard, yes, Ian Howard was
Ian Howard is a fan of early photocopying, so we got on fine about that. And then the computer came in.
That's where Ian was talking about that, because they were the first digital
that's right.
works that
was 1993. But before that, the I suppose the iMac, wasn't called an iMac in those days, was it? Came in, and you could actually manipulate pictures on the computer, on the desktop.
On the desktop.
Yeah, and but I didn't have a computer for a long time. Everybody else where I was working got a computer on their desk.
But they used it for administrative things, not
mostly, yes. I suppose they thought I was just playing. But the image processing possibilities were just dazzling. 93, when I spent the year in Brisbane, things were galloping along, and we scanned things, put them on the computer, juggled with them with rather agricultural image processing tools. And it was a matter of you tried a lot of things and then and discarded all the ones that were completely whoopsie, and then captured and kept the few that worked. It was a kind of art cleansing program where, in a way, I went right back to the cube, the cone and the sphere as my building blocks. And
your experience with photography would have also come in to play in that new environment.
I learned about photography when in Melbourne, where the art school I was working at had a little dark room, and a few students knew how to process film. I've taken photos since I was 6, but processing was a different thing, because you can't. I tried blacking out the bathroom at home, and Mum was not amused. It's too difficult.
Yeah.
But one of the students showed me how to process film, how to print black and white photos. Off I went. I had a sheet, a foolscap sheet with all the instructions on it. And off I went. I spent the weekend at the art school printing the photographs.
Yeah.
I did sleep occasionally.
You once said to me you did sleep occasionally that year. But the year before, 67, you had a big show at Pinacotheca.
Yes.
That would have been your first major solo.
My first show was the year before, 1966, at a gallery in Malvern that was only around for about a year. It was called Carmyle, and it was actually held in a house, a large Malvern full of these fairly splendid 2-storey houses, and that's where I was reviewed for the first time. And
by the time you got to 67, that work had changed.
Well,
quite
yes,
a bit.
because
So that was that again. That you were shifting into another.
Yeah, yes. Those...
Well, you'd come back from overseas.
Yes.
You'd come back from London and Florence.
Yeah.
So that must have made being away for a year or so, or 2 years, must have introduced you to galleries and works overseas. And in Florence, I think you studied some Renaissance art history.
Yeah, but that was a sort of history rather than something you can use nowadays.
Yeah.
And it just gave me a sense of history.
You were born in Melbourne, but could you tell us something about your family and growing up and how you became an art student, how you moved into...
Yes, this is once upon a time,
Yes.
isn't it? I never know where to start. Oh, I know where I'll start. A few years ago, 2008, I think, 7 or 8, a cousin sent me some old photographs of my part of the family from about the time of, before I was conscious of it, about 1935 through to 1945 or 46. And in the first one, I wasn't there. And in the second photograph, I think I was the baby on the back seat of the car. It was my father looking at plans, and he'd drawn on the back of the photograph the plans of the property down at Mornington. The growing family, well, there were only 2 of us, and my father was a pilot in the Air Force, and during World War II started, he went in 1941 when my mother was pregnant with my brother. He was sent off by ship, really funny, sent a pilot by ship, to England to train more pilots for the Battle of Britain. And then he got back, I think at the beginning of 1942. There were photos of, it was a photo of my baby brother with my father and all the tools that he liked to utilise. It's very interesting because he loved to build and make things. And we'd been sent to central Victoria, to Euroa, where family, an aunt and uncle lived out of town, but we had a ghastly year there. Caught all the childhood infectious diseases and stuff like that. But I think it's the only photo of my father with my brother. And then there were about 10 photos, I think. And I thought, oh, this is a really interesting group of photos. And so I made a series of postcards using the photos and introducing colour, shapes, little sort of frame the shapes, not picture frames, and include text on the back that described what was going on in the family at that time. And it all ended up with, we all looked very happy, and well, everybody always looked happy because you had to smile. If anybody brought out a camera, you had to stand there straight and smile, and through thick and thin you smiled. And I don't know how, I think it was really just the digital camera stopped people standing still for a photograph. But it was that decade during World War II, or just before, during and just after, and my family that grew from 2 to 3 to 4 and then ended up with 3 because my father didn't come back from World War II. and he was reported missing in New Guinea on a flight, and he's one of those people whose aircraft was discovered many years later. 21 years later they found it, which was deeply shocking and dazzling, and a relief that you can't imagine. So that made a potent little story, and it was very hard to make a work out of a story that could be, have a chorus of violins in the background, and could be really emotional and hammy and much too dramatic. So I think it's contained in reasonable style. I sent the postcards to people I know and relatives and so on. I think I did an edition of about 20. I think it was 20. And you write on the back, and they're not just, they're all printed on the desktop printer onto a thin card, and then I've put them all together. I thought, I could make a little book, which was what I did next. And then Noreen latched onto it, and she actually published it and got the boards, because it was a accordion book, so it only had flat boards at either end, and had those done professionally, and a nice title on the cover, printing about the publication on the back, and 10 copies and a couple of proofs. And it's really done well, isn't it?
It's a beautiful little book. And the postcards, going back to the postcards, this through the post process that you posted with that book and with the postcards that came before the book, that started, the postcards through the post started way back in the 70s, early 70s.
Back in time, again, leaping backwards and forwards.
And at that time you mostly screen printed them?
Yeah.
Or they're mostly screen printed, front and back.
Something about learning different technologies or exciting technical things to do that serve your purpose is teaching. In the early days of teaching, first of all in Sydney for a year with Ken Reinhardt was the senior art teacher, and there was a guy called Bill Clements who was a sculptor, and the three of us got on really well, and it was they who said to me, "You've got to be a real artist. Do something to do with art every day, even if it's just cleaning the studio." And they made me... I'd left art school 8 years before, and without any belief in the fact that I could do it myself. And I didn't see Ken again until the late 80s, I think, when I went with a group of students from Toowoomba, from the Southern Cross Uni, to Sydney. And he'd really prompted me to take myself seriously.
To go back to the postcards, which became quite an important part of your output at some stage, although you treated them just as through the post communication as well, as well as an art, as you were saying, to learn about particular techniques, which when one looks at all those postcards, together, you can see that you've been experimenting with different techniques.
Yeah. The big paintings and the big non-figurative prints, I didn't know where to go from there because I had been taking lots of photos and I felt I needed an image so much for Clement Greenberg. And I was having problems with a gallery at the time. So I thought, I've got to find a way of being an artist without a gallery. I don't know what... I'd seen Ad Reinhardt postcards. He was a postcard sender from way back, as far as I know. And I thought, oh, that's what I could do. I contacted about 20 people I knew. Some of them were family, some of them were colleagues, and some of them were just friends, that if I sent them a postcard, I started off with very high thoughts once a week, and it grew into about once a month eventually, because otherwise how do you go to work every day when you're busy printing lots of little colours? I made postcards about a sort of diary, something I had done or something I had seen or eaten, and it worked. Oh, I did originally say that you had to reply through the post. I wanted it to be a circular thing. And I had a friend who was a potter and who made me ceramic postcards, sent them in padded bags through the post. She only did it a few times, but and a guy at work who sent me things that had been newsworthy during that week. So I had a little pile of communications, and it began to really sort of flourish.
Alison Carroll picked up on it.
Oh yeah, that's
an exhibition.
Early. That's the first
with Peter Rossman in the Art Gallery of South Australia. We
all thought it was a bit funny because I was very cranky about art galleries, and then when Alison contacted me, I wonder if she'd heard about what I did. We thought it was pretty funny that the postcards were started as a way of bypassing
the gallery system.
Art gallery system, but they look quite good because she posted on the wall the front of one and then the back of it after it had been posted, so it had stamp, all the franking. Made a very nice exhibition, and Peter Rossman, being a sculptor, had made these metal hinged books which sat on the table, my tiny little postcards on the wall in a long narrow room. Made a good show.
So then, Normana, in the early 80s, you took another huge leap by leaving Melbourne and taking up a position at the University of Southern Queensland.
In
teaching
Toowoomba.
Printmaking.
Yes.
In Toowoomba, yes.
Big cultural change coming from Melbourne to Toowoomba. And I had to keep my big mouth closed quite often. But it was great to actually be employed for something specific and have all those students who, of course, if you go to art school, you want to study that thing, so you want to be good at it. It's not like being at secondary school where you're there anyway, and you choose art probably because it's the easy way out, which it's not.
But Leon Cantrell was he was the Dean of Arts, and he was very supportive of people in the art school, and encouraged you to take residencies overseas.
Yeah. He loved to get you doing things that gave him a bit of clout too, I suppose, but he would suddenly swoop into the room and say, "Oh, now you've been here 4 years doing all the printmaking. Why don't you go to Paris for 6 months?" I said, "Leon, you're joking." No, I'm not. And he would then encourage a staff member, I suppose, to go off and I didn't go to Paris, I went to Aberdeen because that's where they had printmaking workshop. So as soon as I came back to Brisbane, I think they forgot all about trying to sell them. But Noreen sold this big grey book full of pages, and each side of each, I think there were 60 pages, 120 days, each side of the paper covered one day of my 4 months in Scotland.
So one resides now in the State Library of Queensland.
Yeah, and the other ones at the
National Library
in Canberra.
Normana, you mentioned before about working with students and how exciting it was and how the tension would build up. Can you tell us something about, for instance, working in Toowoomba with some of the students there who have become quite well known?
Well, earlier than that, jumping right back again, some of the students that I had in the early days in Melbourne, in the northern suburbs, were really exciting. They were not kids, and they've become famous artists. I mean, they weren't only taught by me, they were taught by other artists like Dale Hickey. They mostly came from Eastern Europe, Greece, Italy, you name it. They came from somewhere interesting, and they brought with it their cultural habits, fantastic colour schemes. That was really stimulating, and I think both Dale and I were, bug-eyed by this, our students, and so that was exciting. And then the move to Toowoomba, Michael Schlitz came from, what's the name? Deception Bay. He had been an apprentice jeweller, I think, and he wanted to do an art course instead.
Well, talking of Michael and going back to your postcards, he recently sent you a huge postcard, which is sort of like a
present.
Yes, present, but as also as honouring your postcard tradition. And I just happened to have swiped it off your mantelpiece. And here it is, and it came through the post with the typical Michael Schlitz letter.
He has sent lots of inventive postcards, and so has Jonathan Shea. Jonathan's were mostly Christmas cards.
So in the 90s, you really took up. After that exhibition at QCA, or after your fellowship at QCA, you really experimented with digital printmaking.
The technology just
opened up.
It was very good, and the price of computers came down in a spectacular way.
Well, then in the late 90s and in 2000, you were at the Southern Cross University. You did a master's with them.
Yes.
And a big exhibition, Small Ceremonies.
I began to think about life after teaching in an art school, and I also began to think more carefully about the travelling that I'd done, and because I've always been the kind of person that if I want to do it, I do it. Doesn't matter whether anybody wants to come or not.
But you did go to Europe to look at some specific artworks around about this time before you started doing those figurative work.
Yeah, that's.
So what were those?
That's
artworks?
my masters. I had to think up a project. I can't remember. One trip merges into another, doesn't it, at times? But as part of that idea for the MA, the project, was to link to link the ceremonies or these gestures of having cups of tea, cups of coffee, little things to eat, lunch, whatever, to artworks, and then and look at them and study them, and then do my own version.
So when you came back and started on your masters, it was also about experimenting with the technology of digital printing, especially the digital printing on canvas.
Yeah.
And big prints, not smaller prints. Yeah.
That one.
So, can you tell us a little bit about the experimentation and the technology there?
You don't really think about it as experimentation. You just do it.
Do it.
Well, I suppose over those few years, from about 95 or so, when I did this water print, 2000 when I did or whatever the date is, technology suddenly became much more sophisticated.
So what was the difference in that technology mid-90s to 2000?
Sophistication?
Well, to me it's smoother.
Oh yeah, well, the memory, their ability to pack memory into these files just increased. Because with the floppy disks, you know, it was that or nothing.
Where do you think this is leading you in your work?
Well, I had the cataracts removed from my eyes last year, and I thought, oh, now's the time, because that painting over there, I bought when my eyes were a bit dim, and after having them done, I thought, that's a completely different painting. It's a painting by a friend, Namia Davis, and I said, Namia, it's a different painting and I love it. But that kind of awareness of the colour, I thought I should actually go back to looking at colour against colour, which I like very much. Well, it was Lyndall Malani who said, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, I'm just getting over the fact that the Queensland Art Gallery bought a painting that I did in 1970, and suddenly there's interest in these ancient works. And she said, well, you could go full circle.